Welcome to the Poetry Podcast with A, an Amber Michelle's work production. Hi everyone, happy Thursday. I'm super pumped to be here, and especially on this episode, I am really realizing that these book reviews are definitely one of my favorite series that I put out and I get to share with everyone because it's just so fun to reflect on the book that you've read. So today we are talking about The PoetX by Elizabeth Acevedo. Such an amazing book. I actually read this book last year for the first time and I reread it this year. And when I first was introduced to this book, it was actually a while ago. I think it was 2019. And I think so. Yeah. I'm like, did it even come out in 2019? Because I am so bad with my freaking years. But it was around that time. I'm pretty sure it was. So I remember being at Target and seeing this book sitting just on display, and it caught my eye and it sat on my shelf for years. It was one of those books that like you go into Target and you're going to buy one thing, but then you come out with like 18 million things. This book was one of those for me. So I had it sitting on my shelf for a while, and then one of my friends told me that this was her favorite book, and I was like, really? I was like, I actually have that book sitting on my shelf. So I went home and read it in 2023, and it was just a book that really, really inspired me. It just surprised me how much it inspired me because the premise of the book is about a young woman. She is in high school and she kind of has some struggles at home, just like typical family issues, but she really has like a relationship with her mom that they don't see eye to eye, and it's really hard on her. And her mother is very strict. So it's really it has a lot of relationships that she's going through, that she's struggling with. But and specifically with her mom really pushes an agenda of religion onto her, and she really struggles with that. And she kind of finds her own, I view it as like she finds her own religion in poetry and writing. And she was deeply inspired by one of her teachers. So it was just really interesting to read it again for the second time, because the first time I just fell in love with like the story and everything. And now that the second time I read it, I knew kind of what was going to be happening. I was reading it with more of an eye of how she wrote it, if that makes sense. So she has 3 different parts: part 1, part 2, part 3. And in part 1, I noticed that she introduced almost all of the characters in part 1. And I just took note of that because I'm actually writing a book based on a college experience I had. I know hers was high school, but mine is college. So I just feel very relatable. I also was going to a liberal arts college at the time. So it was, Catholicism was heavily influenced. Like her mommy in this book was just very heavily influenced by Catholicism. So I just had so much I just related to her so much in this book, even though she's in high school and I'm 29 right now. So I really think that this read could be for someone that's in high school or someone that is older, not even beyond their 20s. You could be in your 40s, 70s. It's just such a relatable book because of all the dynamics that this young woman goes through in finding her voice. So there was a lot of big takeaways for me in this book. And one thing that it inspired me to do was to start a book club. So she goes to a poetry club in this book, but I just loved how that became like her community. And the book club I'm starting is Bound by Books Book Club. It's really focused on making you become a better writer and more engaged reader. So how am I doing that? How is this book club different than all the other book clubs out there? I feel like I really am choosing books that I am super inspired by. So not every book that I'm reading, I'm going to be talking about in the book club. I'm just choosing one a month. And with this book club, I also have a little writing activity for each time we meet. So for this book, something that really stood out to me when I read it a second time was how influential one of her teachers were. And I loved in this book how they she put her assignments in there, and it was really, really cool to see. So I almost am going to be doing like a little writing assignment in our first book club with the Bound by Books book club. And I'm not going to share exactly what that prompt is going to be. But we're going to do like a little bit of a writing assignment, arts and crafts, make it kind of different too, because I think it's super important to mix in different types of art. So like, for example, arts and crafts, mixing that into writing, like not just make a normal letter, kind of make it fun and funky and take different materials and put it on the paper. So it's not just going to be like a writing prompt. It's going to be a little bit more interactive. So I feel like that is going to make us better writers overall by doing these little writing assignments together in our little community. And then also we will be learning how to be more engaged readers by some of the topics I'm going to be bringing up inside the book club. So it's going to be facilitated, and I think that's important to really have that like grounding conversation to kind of always get back, make sure everyone's being heard and not just like one person dominating the conversation, because the quietest person in the room can have one of the most profound things to say. So I think that's why it's important to kind of have that moderator to go around the room. So yeah, that is something new that's going to be kind of related to this series of the podcast, these book reviews, is that some of these books are going to be tied to the Bound by Books book club. So if you're interested in joining, you can go on my Substack or just send me an email off my website. My website is ambermichellepoetry.com. So there's like a little book club tab on my website. So click that and you'll learn more about what to do if you're interested in joining. And yeah, I'm super excited about that. So beyond that, with this book, I wanted to read a poem in this book, because this poem, I'm going to read two poems from this book, the PoetX, because one of the poems stood out to me so much the first time I read it, and I was publishing my book at the time when I read it, and I actually added, it was like one of the last poems I added to my book. So I want to first read the poem that inspired me, that caught my eye, and then read the poem that I wrote in my book, because you can tell that it's inspired by it. So yeah, let me get to it. Okay. She's so freaking funny when she talks in this book. Like, one of my favorite characters, let me just say this before I dive in, is she's going to confirmation class. And usually when you are in confirmation class, you're in 8th grade, but she is in high school when she took it. She is a little bit later for reasons. The book explains why. So she's a little bit older in this confirmation class, and she just challenges the priest in such a mature way. I believe it's in such a mature way because these questions are profound that she's asking about religion and faith and creation of the world, that it really got my mind thinking. I'm not saying like everything she says in this book that I agree with about her views on Catholicism, I kind of have my own views, but it got me thinking, and I loved her perspective on it. I am a very open person. I like to hear those types of perspectives because they get you thinking and they broaden your mindset. So the reason why I love the priest in this book is because he's so calm, and I love the ending of him coming together. He really supports her in her poetry and her writing and her slam that she kind of gets to towards the end of the book. I'm trying not to say too much about the book just in case you want to read it. But I would really say that I'll just say that that's my favorite character because of how much he supports her, especially in the end, and even when she is challenging him on these questions about religion, he's not offended, and he shouldn't be. Like her mother kind of gets offended and defensive when she asks all these questions, but he doesn't. He stays very steady and wants to have deeper conversations about them. So I thought that was beautiful. And I also loved that he was a boxer in his past life and then he became a priest. Like, my father is a martial arts artist, not an artist. He's into martial arts. So he is always in the ring, always doing jujitsu, combating, and I just really relate to like UFC, boxing, because that's what I grew up with. So that was just really cool. And I could also, like, my dad is not obviously, but he is married to my mom still, but I could see him he always said that if my mom died, he'd become a priest. So this figure in this book just kind of reminded me of my dad. So I think that's might be why he's my favorite. Okay, let's get to the poem. I think the story of Genesis is mad stupid. God made the earth in 7 days, including humans, right? But in biology, we learned dinosaurs existed on Earth for millions of years before other species. Unless 7 days is a metaphor, what about humans evolving from apes? Unless Adam's creation was a metaphor too? And what about this apple? How come God didn't explain couldn't eat it? He gave Eve curiosity, but it didn't expect her to use it? Unless the apple is a metaphor, is the whole Bible a poem? What's not a metaphor? Did any of it actually happen? I catch my breath. Look around the room. Carrot Dad is bright red. The younger kids are silent, watching like it's a WWE match. And Father Sean's face has turned hard as the marble altar. Why don't you and I talk after class, Xiomara? Okay, so one thing that when I was reading this that I didn't explain before is that this is another reason why I'm freaking obsessed with this book, is that each poem inside this book relates to each other. So reading this off the cuff, you might not fully understand what's happening. But like the poem right before was talking about how she's already in confirmation class. And then the next poem is about when they're packing to leave from confirmation class, and how then the next poem is Father Sean sits with her and talks to her about everything. So pretty much this book is a poetry book, but it's a novel written in verse. And that has just changed my perspective in so many ways on poetry books. And I really want to write my next book like this one, or who knows if it's going to be my next book, because other ideas have been coming into my life. And I don't know exactly which book I'm actually going to be writing next, but the book that's based on a college experience of mine would be written like this, because like a novel written in verse, because I just love the way that poetry sounds and it feels in your heart. But I also love a good novel of the storyline and developing of characters. So the way that she mixed it like this inside this book was stunning to me, and very inspirational. I didn't even know poetry books could be written like this. I don't know if that makes me less cultured or whatever, but it was the first one that stood out to me, that's written like this. Like the way that the storyline, I was able to follow it throughout, was just absolutely the most engaging thing I have read, especially in 2023. I've been really reading a lot in 2024, but yeah, this definitely was at my top. Number 1. So now I want to read a poem that I wrote based off this poem, because it just had me thinking so much. So the book that I wrote was a sobriety book. It was about my journey towards sobriety. And this fall, I had 4 different chapters, and each chapter was a season. So this poem fell into the autumn season. And that was really about renewal. It talked about a relapse and how you can kind of begin again. Okay, so this poem is called Lessons from Eve. Where would the world be without Eve's curiosity? Did the blasphemy of eating the forbidden fruit teach us a lesson, or are we still in the garden paying for her sins? Without tasting my own forbidden fruits, I would not know how to wrestle my demons or recognize my inebriated habits. I'd never rewrite my past, and neither should she, because the power of discovery can only come from exploration. So thank you, Elizabeth Acevedo, for writing that poem that inspired me to write this poem. It is just kind of the way the world works, it just feels full circle when you kind of have moments like these. Yeah, so beautiful. Just even reading this poem just takes me back to that place at the end of 2023 when I was just really questioning things. And I just really love the thought of like the power of discovery can only come from exploration, because I've just been living such a different way of life than I ever thought I was going to live. And that only comes from being curious and stepping outside your comfort zone of things that you grew up knowing. You can only really know that by stepping out. And just like this book explains, she's stepping out from the norm of what her brother does or what her best friend does, of how she was raised. She's stepping into her own skin and being her own person, and that's just something that we should all do. I cannot advocate for this book enough. So I did want to read one last poem, and I think reading these poems and these like excerpts from the book just really kind of give you a taste of what this book is about without giving it away. This poem really stood out to me the second time I read the book, and I think it stood out to me because of there was this word that I learned. I love learning a new word in a book. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it right. Cacophony. I did that right. I had it kind of queued up before because I wanted to read it right. Cacophony. And I was like, coffee, knee. But I still forgot it. That's my pregnancy brain. Okay, let me take another sip. Cacophony, just so you know what cacophony means. If you're like me and didn't know what it means, I'm sure y'all are smarter than me, but it is a harsh mixture of sounds. I love that, cacophony. Okay. Gotta use that in a poem soon. Okay. This poem is called Burn. Mommy stares at me like I'm speaking in tongues and continues praying. We're wild women flinging verses at each other like grenades in a battlefield, a cacophony of violent poems, and we're both gasping, wordless. Tears roll down our cheeks, but mine aren't from the smoke. I cough on my own tongue. I've never mourned something dying before this moment. I have no more poems. My mind blanks. I roar tears from my mouth. Burn it, burn it. This is where the poems are, I say, thumping a fist against my chest. Will you burn me? Will you burn me too? You would burn me, wouldn't you, if you could? I definitely, in 2023 when I read it, in 2024 when I read this book, I was bawling at this part of the book. This is, I would say, one of the pieces where there's like two climaxes, I think, in this book, which is really fun because it just kind of takes you on a little bit of a roller coaster throughout, especially when you get to part 2 and part 3. But there's like a climax in part 2, and then there's a climax in part 3 that really takes you on this journey of difficult relationships and navigating them, and how you go about something that is difficult in your relationships, especially like mother-daughter relationship. I think that was very apparent in this book, that the mother and daughter relationship was something. And the main character, the high school student, is just so mature, and the way she went about fixing this relationship, I'll just give you a little bit of a clue. It involves my favorite character in the book, and I thought it was just so beautiful. I thought it was a really good way to solve an issue. So yeah, and another thing about these poems in here, they're just so from the heart, and I felt every single poem. Like, even again, like, this poem might not fully make sense of what's happening, but you can still feel it, the emotion, when I'm reading it, because each poem just has so much emotion. But once you read it collectively inside the entire book, that's really when you can be like, whoa, like the impact in the meaning really, really hits you. So again, I definitely recommend this book. Definitely my favorite. It will just, there's a thing on the front cover that says, this is a story that will slam the power of poetry and love back into your heart. Yes, love, it has a lot of different relationships that she kind of goes through, but it has a good ending. It does make you believe in love, especially at the end. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears away from this book, The PoetX. And if you want to join the Bound by Books book club, we'll be discussing more and really diving into the books. Reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about the book club. But I want to give a little teaser into next Thursday with our guest. She is the author of You Can Go to Hell and Back, Christina Santiago. She is an amazing writer and just connector in our community, in our local Kansas City community. She is someone that I met through actually Instagram, which, you know, sometimes it's just like really hard to be on social media and be posting things, being vulnerable online. But then people like Christina will reach out to you and want to meet you for a coffee and get connected more. And I cannot just say how grateful I am for all the people that I actually have met on social media, because without social media, I don't know. I'm sure Christina and I would have eventually ran into each other, but social media was the way that we originally got connected. So I bought her book. Again, I've read this book 2 to 3 times. This is a quick read, I would say. And I just think that this book is like the precipice of her writing journey. This is her first debut book, and I can just see her writing so much more in the future. And I know she's going to be. She's actually working on her audiobook for this book right now. So this book is a very sensitive one, I would say, because it talks about her getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And if you've never dealt with this mental illness, either for yourself or with someone that you love, it can be kind of hard to understand. And I think Christina just explains it so well in this book through the power of poetry, and really shows how you can go to hell and you can come back out of that. So in our episode, we definitely talk about this book, her writing process for it, but we also really focused on this project she was working on that was called The Journey Through, with a visual artist who uses graphite to create her artwork. And they collaborated because for all the pieces that she did, Christina wrote poetry on them. And I actually see that a lot at the Nelson Atkins Museum. My friend Jose Faust, who was on a pop-up series in the past in season 1, he actually writes a lot of that. And that was just like my big takeaway from talking to her and learning about how she went about writing poetry on an art piece. So I have this like thing that I want to do now. I have a lot of art in my home. This piece behind me is called Do You Believe in Miracles? And I really want to write a piece about it. There was one time I was sitting just in one of these chairs across the way from this painting, and a poem came into my mind and I started writing it, and then it left me. You know, that always happens to me. That happens to me a lot. But so I'm kind of waiting for this poem to formulate in my consciousness again, because it already exists in my subconscious since I've had it before. It just needs to like really come again. So that is something that just really was super fun to talk about with Christina in our episode, was her work that she did in this art exhibit. So yeah, I do want to read a poem from her book, just because this was her debut book and her audiobook will be coming out soon. And just to give a little tease of, what is inside this, that you could go and learn more after you watch the next episode with her and see if this book is for you. And I think you can still buy it, but she does sell out of this book a lot because, you know, she's awesome like that. So I think she is working on getting more books. I'm not sure exactly if you can order them this second. You might be able to now, but I know she was kind of working on getting some more printed. So this poem is called Manic Pixie Dream Girl. I'm not your manic pixie dream girl. My mania is not here to inspire or entertain you. My mania is a symptom of a chemical imbalance in my brain, and it drove me insane until it sent me away. I'm not your manic pixie dream girl. This flight of ideas, this word vomit tumbling out of my mouth may feel like divine inspiration, but is really sensical for a reason. I'm not your manic pixie dream girl, because mental illness is not intriguing. It is not alluring. It does not make me more interesting, more empathetic, maybe, more compassionate, possibly, but not a specimen for you to study. My mania burned my world until all that was left were the ashes of my realized dreams. Once I knew what was happening, once I got a diagnosis, I had to start all over again. It has taken years to get this stable, years to create a new life that I'm proud of. So you will not reduce me to your fantasy. You will not minimize me to your fetish. I am not your manic pixie dream girl because she does not exist. I think that this poem, the reason why I chose this poem for this book to give a tease into what it is because of how sensitive this topic is, and to realize that I just wanted to highlight that she is not writing this book to glorify this. She's really writing this as a way and tool, an outlet to get out of the dark and into the light. So I thought that was a really important piece to read. And again, I'm excited for you to hear more from Christina herself about this book next week as we dive deeper. In the meantime, get your copy, follow along as we read with her on some poems. So thank you so much for joining this episode, and I'll see you next Thursday. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Leave me a review on your favorite listening channel, Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. Always with love, A.